Hello everybody and welcome to this lecture about devolution and its impact on democracy. Before I get started on the lecture, I just want to explain a little bit of the thinking behind it and its structure. Usually my lectures on debates within UK politics tend to look at two sides of an argument, pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses, or whatever it is. But in this lecture I'm going to focus instead on arguments specifically on one side in the debate, namely by opponents of devolution. And I'm going to take each of their arguments in turn and then show why in each case I disagree with this argument. And so in this way I'm still presenting both sides of the argument, but my focus will be on evaluating the arguments given by devolution's opponents, rather than giving two separate opposing sets of arguments. The reason I'm doing it this way is because I want to show you that this is a way you can structure your essays that will really make sure you hit those AO3 marks for evaluation. After all, the way exam questions are phrased is that they'll generally give you a statement or a claim on one side of the debate and then ask you to evaluate the statement. So if you structure your arguments around the arguments underpinning that specific claim and then show how they can be critiqued or criticised, then you are making sure you're doing exactly what the question asks, and this is likely to get you higher AO3 marks than simply giving both sides of the argument. Anyway, you'll see what I mean once we get started, so let's get going. The phrase devolution refers to the delegation of powers from a central authority to a local or regional one. And in Britain it tends to refer specifically to the delegation of policy-making powers to the regional assemblies created in Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland in the late 1990s, as well as the elected mayors in some of England's major cities such as London and Manchester. Boris Johnson sparked controversy in 2020 when he claimed that devolution had been, quote, a disaster. In this lecture, I will break down this argument into three common claims made by opponents of devolution. Firstly, that it's undermined parliamentary sovereignty. Secondly, that it's led to unequal citizenship entitlements. And thirdly, that it's leading to the breakup of the UK. I will show why each of these supposed outcomes have been considered detrimental to democracy, but I will also then go on to show why such claims are flawed and that ultimately devolution has significantly improved democracy in the UK. So first of all, opponents of devolution claim that it has undermined parliamentary sovereignty. Parliamentary sovereignty, the principle that the Westminster Parliament is the supreme lawmaking authority in the UK, is said to date back to the Bill of Rights of 1689 and to be at the core of British democracy. Constitutional theorist A.V. Dicey considered it to be one of the twin pillars of the UK Constitution, made up as it is of elected representatives from all 650 constituencies across the UK. Since the creation of the devolved assemblies, however, it's claimed that parliamentary sovereignty has been significantly weakened. This is because many laws passed in the UK Parliament now no longer apply to large parts of the country. In devolved policy areas such as healthcare and education, for example, laws passed at Westminster do not actually apply to Wales, Scotland and Northern Ireland, as those regions now create their own laws and policies in these areas. So how can the UK Parliament still be said to be sovereign, it is argued, when its laws no longer apply to large swathes of the country? And this is said to be undemocratic, not only due to the centrality of Westminster Parliament in British democracy, but also because it's claimed the Westminster Parliament has much greater democratic legitimacy than the devolved assemblies, as it's generally elected by a much higher proportion of UK citizens, with turnout consistently higher for UK parliamentary elections than for regional assembly elections. The low turnout of only 25% in the referendum that led to the creation of the Welsh Assembly, for example, is often used in support of this claim. This argument, however, is deeply flawed. The UK is not a federal state, but a unitary one, meaning that ultimate power still resides with the central authority, in this case the UK Parliament. Westminster, by passing the Scotland Act and the Government of Wales Acts in 1998, for example, may have delegated some of its power to the newly created assemblies, but there is nothing to stop Westminster repealing those acts and closing them down if it seriously objects to how those powers are being used. Even the 2016 Scotland Act, which promised never to close down the Scottish Parliament without the consent of the Scottish people, could itself be repealed if a majority in Westminster so desired. Parliamentary sovereignty holds that Parliament has the power to make or unmake any law it chooses, and this power is unchanged by the creation of the devolved assemblies. Of course, it may be politically difficult or unwise to make such a move, but parliamentary sovereignty has never implied that Parliament will not face political difficulties in carrying out its will. It merely means that it has the legal power to do so. And in this sense, Dicey's pillar still stands firm. Furthermore, the claim that lower turnouts undermine the democratic legitimacy of the devolved assemblies has also been challenged by recent trends. The most recent Welsh Assembly election, for example, in 2016, reached a turnout of 45%, still lower than for UK general elections, of course, but still almost double the turnout of 1998. This shows that as devolution proceeds, more and more of those affected are starting to understand its importance and utilise their right to participate. Turnout in UK general elections, on the other hand, is going in the other direction, with turnout significantly lower than it was in the 1990s. There's no reason to think that both these trends will not continue. And the highest turnout in UK history for any vote was the 85% turnout reached in the Scottish independence referendum in 2014, which you could argue I would say clearly was a direct result of Scottish devolution and the rise of the Scottish National Party. Thus, it's clear that devolution is actually promoting participation, a key element of democracy. And the democratic legitimacy of the devolved assemblies is further enhanced by the proportional voting systems they use, which result in chambers which much more accurately reflect the population's party preferences than the first past the post system used for Westminster elections. A second argument used by opponents of devolution is that it has led to unequal citizenship entitlements in different parts of the UK. Legislation such as free prescriptions in Scotland and Wales, for example, or free university tuition in Scotland, means that UK citizens' free access to such services depends on where in the UK they live, despite them all being citizens of the same country. Dicey's other pillar of the Constitution, the rule of law, stipulates that the law applies equally to all, and yet different laws now apply to different citizens of the same state. This, claim the critics of devolution, is undemocratic, as equal citizenship is held to be a core element of modern democracy. Again, however, this argument is misplaced. Fundamentally, democracy means that the policies implemented should reflect popular preferences. As a result of devolution, each of the 4 nations within the UK get the entitlements that they vote for. The reason English voters have to pay for prescriptions and university education is not due to devolution, but because they consistently elect parties that support these policies. All that devolution has done is allowed those parts of the UK that are opposed to such measures to have policies that more accurately reflect their political opinions. Before devolution, for example, in the 1980s, Scotland and Wales were subjected to Conservative governments for whom they never voted and suffered far more from the policies of those governments than the English voters who elected them. Thatcher's mass closures of coal pits and steel factories, for example, hit Scotland and Wales particularly hard, as that was where most of those industries were located. This was a classic example of what J.S. Mill called the tyranny of the majority, where minority groups are discriminated against by majority populations. Wales and Scotland have always had a more left-wing political culture than England, and devolution has allowed that to be reflected in the laws and policies under which they live. Nothing could be more democratic than that. Finally, perhaps the biggest concern of devolution's critics is that it is supposedly leading to the breakup of the UK. Devolution, it is claimed, has led to a rise in nationalism in the non-English nations, as exemplified most clearly by the rise of the Scottish National Party, who have been in power in the Scottish executive since 2011. Devolution has divided the UK by promoting Scottish, Welsh and Northern Irish identities at the expense of a unified British identity. And this has led to the real potential of Scotland breaking away from the UK altogether, with opinion polls now consistently showing majority support for independence. Such a breakup of the UK, argue the critics, would be disastrous, weakening Britain's power globally, especially given that Britain's only oil reserves, its nuclear bases and a significant proportion of its armed forces are based in Scotland, and potentially leading to Britain, for example, losing its place as a permanent member of the UN Security Council. Domestically, it would add a whole new layer of unnecessary and expensive bureaucracy by creating a border within the island of Britain, making trade and travel potentially more difficult and expensive. It would also be profoundly undemocratic, it is claimed, as this breakup could be triggered by a vote of the Scottish people alone, without the support of the majority of the UK population as a whole. The UK could be broken up, that is, without any democratic mandate from the UK population. Again, however, this argument is flawed. Scotland is a nation in its own right, with a long and proud history as an independent unified state up until the Union of 1707. There's nothing democratic about forcing it to stay in this union against its will. Nevertheless, despite the opinion polls, Scottish independence is unlikely to actually happen. Constitutional issues are reserved, not devolved matters, meaning that Scotland cannot hold another independence referendum, let alone declare itself independent, without Westminster's consent. And both Theresa May and Boris Johnson have made it clear they will not allow such a referendum to take place. But even if it did, and Scotland did actually become independent, leading to a loss of the UK's global power status, many would argue that this is long overdue. Britain's global status is a hangover of its days as an empire, and its legally dubious wars against Yugoslavia, Iraq, Libya and Yemen, for example, suggest that it has long lost its legitimacy as a global actor. If the breakup of the UK led to a decline in Britain's power, this would only be a net benefit for the people of the world. It would also be more democratic, reducing the opportunity for the British government to impose violent policies against people who are not entitled to vote them out, a most undemocratic state of affairs. In conclusion then, devolution has not been a disaster for UK democracy, quite the opposite. It has allowed each nation within the UK the chance to enact policies which actually reflect the political preferences of their people, the very definition of democracy. And although it may be true that it has enhanced rival national identities to the British identity, this cannot actually lead to a breakup of the UK without Parliament's consent. The UK Parliament remains legally sovereign, and if that Parliament votes to charge for services which are free elsewhere, that's a reflection of the political preferences of the English people and is not the fault of devolution itself. So thanks for listening, and I hope this has given you an idea of how you can structure your essays in the way I've structured this lecture, by taking just the arguments on one side of the debate and showing how you believe they're flawed, ensuring that you're consistently evaluating and picking up more of those AO3 marks. Thanks for listening, and goodbye.